dumping these documents, sometimes dripping them out on a daily basis, and thereby affecting the nature of the campaigns. These releases in particular through WikiLeaks were cited, I think, by then candidate Trump dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And when there's a discussion about how consequential was the Russian intervention in 2016, we'll never know whether it was decisive. I think in a close election you could make the argument that any significant intervention may have been decisive. But we do know one person who thought it was very significant, and that was Donald Trump, who made it a core part of his campaign on a nearly daily basis once those document dumps began. Now, as concerned as I was about those document dumps, my gravest concern at the time was that the Russians were going to start dumping forgeries among the real documents. You can imagine how incendiary it would be had they taken a real email between two Clinton campaign workers and added a third paragraph suggesting that the two were engaged in illegality and dumped it with a host of authentic external emails. It would be, in the run-up to an election, virtually impossible to disprove the veracity of such a fraud. You could, for example, corroborate parts of the email by the fact that it was between two real people. And depending on what else was covered in the email, you could corroborate other aspects of the email. The burden that would have placed on the Clinton campaign or any campaign to disprove the fraudulent component would be a burden too great, I think, for any campaign, particularly in the polarized times that we're in. This was my predominant fear. Now, I was also concerned about the vulnerability of the elections infrastructure. The fact that so many of our polling stations in so many key states and jurisdictions still don't have a paper trail. It is negligence, I think, on its face in this kind of environment not to have a paper trail. And yet that was the case in 2016, and tragically, I'm here to tell you tonight that is still the case as we go into 2020. Now, the states at that time, some of them, took the position, hey, federal government, butt out. We run our own elections. This is a local affair. The problem, of course, with that reasoning is that if a swing jurisdiction in a swing state screws it up because they don't maintain good security of their technology, they screw it up not just for themselves, they screw it up potentially for their state and indeed potentially for the whole country. So we all have a stake in this. But nonetheless, there was resistance at the time to making sure that the states were taking full advantage of the diagnostics that the federal government had to offer through the Department of Homeland Security, where we could assess vulnerabilities in these state voting systems. And at the same time, there was a reluctance in the Obama administration to more forcefully call out the Russians for what they were doing out of a fear, I think, that it would be perceived as attempting to influence the outcome by pointing out that a foreign nation was indeed interfering in affairs. This put Senator Feinstein, who was then the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, in a like difficult position that we felt the need to go public ourselves even before the administration was willing to, and we did, in calling out what the Russians were doing. And the argument that we made to the administration, urging them to do so, was that the American people have not only a right but a need to know that a foreign nation is attempting to influence the outcome of our election. But as grave as those concerns were about the technology and what the Russians were doing, my greatest fear was something that they did not yet do, at least not to a significant degree, and that is introduce forged content among those stolen emails. Now, I bring this up because my paramount concern going into 2020 is that same prospect, aided now by a new technology, that technology being something called deep fake technology. Now, most of you are young enough to know what that is. But for those of you who are not young enough to know what that is, deepfake technology is a technology that allows you to produce utterly convincing and at the same time utterly fraudulent video or audio. progress for that matter, but most pernicious, through the use of artificial intelligence, you can now create video that is so realistic of people saying things they never said that with the naked eye you cannot tell it's a fraud. And you can imagine if that technology is deployed in the run-up to the election or in the primary to suggest that Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or anyone else or Donald Trump is saying something that in fact they have never said, just how disruptive that could be to the election. We did a hearing on this recently in the Intelligence Committee on deepfake technology and just how good it's getting, and the race between the artificial intelligence to create it and the artificial intelligence to detect it. And what stood out to me about the testimony of these experts was that the technology is now getting good enough where our ability to detect deepfakes may only be able to give a statistical analysis of the likelihood that it's a fraud. So not only will you be fooled by seeing the fake, even running it through a computer analysis will not necessarily be enough to demonstrate that it's a fake. Not to 100% in any way. And the environment that that creates also produces what one of the witnesses called the liar's dividend. And that is an environment in which the biggest liars have the biggest dividend. Because this technology and its use allows you not only to put out things that are fraudulent and call them real, but it allows you to deny things that in fact are real. And we got a trial run on the use of this technology just a few months ago with a video that many of you may have seen of Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi speaking at a conference. That video was what is described as a cheap fake, so it wasn't deep fake, it actually took the speech that she gave. It slowed down the speed and raised the timbre of her voice so that it appeared that she was drunk or impaired in some way. Now what they told us at that hearing is that if 10 million people saw it, and 1 million saw it almost overnight, 10 million people would see that video, maybe 1 or 2 million of them would ever find out that in fact that video had been doctored. The rest would be under the misleading impression that she was impaired. What may be more pernicious, though, is that even the people who are later convinced that the video is doctored may never completely lose the lingering negative impression it leaves on the person. So even if you're convinced that a video that is surfaced online of the presidential candidate is a fraud, even if you are made to understand that it's a fraud, you may still not lose completely the negative influence or impression you get if that content were racist or misogynist or just dismissive or played into a narrative that one party or the other wanted to tell about that candidate. And you might remember 3 years ago they were trying to tell a narrative about Hillary Clinton that she was unwell. Had they used that technology to produce a video like they did with Speaker Pelosi, it would have cemented people who were ready to believe that. It might have persuaded people who weren't ready to believe that. So you can see, I think, how pernicious this danger is. And this remains, to me, one of the cardinal risks to our elections going forward. So what should be done about this? Well, what the president should be doing about this right now, not just the issue of deepfake technology, and I and colleagues are leaning on the technology companies to develop consistent policies. When videos are put up that are fraudulent and intended to deceive, to take them down. It's one thing when you're talking about parody, it's another when you're talking about a deliberate effort to deceive. But far broader than this, what the president ought to be doing to protect our elections is sitting down with his cabinet and saying, Director Hasker of the CIA, what are you learning about Russian plans and intentions in the next election? Secretary of State Pompeo, what message have you delivered to your Russian counterpart about the sanctions that Russia will see if they screw with us again? If they don't like what we've imposed, just think what they have coming if they mess with us again.
Secretary of Homeland Security, what states are making use of the diagnostics we have, what states are reluctant, and who around this table can weigh in with them to make sure they do what's right and necessary? Are the resources being devoted that are necessary? Around that table, the President should be pressing everyone. Secretary of Defense, I want you to tell me what a proportionate response would be if the Russians or anyone else interfere the way they did in 2016. I want to do what's more, we need to make it clear so there is a return to fair intervention. Of course, none of that is happening. And none of that is happening because for any of those cabinet members to raise that, the President would consider a threat to his regime. So they're not going to raise it, and of course he's not going to raise it. In fact, as we saw today, all too staggeringly, the President is now quite overtly, once again, calling on 4 nations, today China, to intervene in our election by doing a sham investigation of his opponent, at least one of the opponents he fears. And so we go into the next elections, I have to say, forewarned about the possibilities. And there are indeed people at the agencies, at the mid-level and sometimes at the top levels, who are trying to address this problem. But we also go into the next election with all too great vulnerability. But let me open the aperture for a moment. Because one of the things that became so apparent to me as we were looking into what the Russians did in 2016 and what that means in terms of what they might do in 2020 is that this was new to us, that a hostile power would intervene in such a blatant way in our election. But it wasn't new to much of the rest of the world. Russia has been intervening in other democracies for quite some time. And perhaps more significantly, this wasn't a phenomenon related only to Russia's malevolent activities in the US or in Europe or elsewhere. But what was going on was a broad challenge to liberal democracy everywhere. Sometimes, yes, fueled by Russia, other times quite indigenous. And what we have been seeing is a rise of authoritarianism and a challenge to liberal democracy all over the globe. You see the rise of autocrats in places like Hungary and Poland, in the Philippines with Duterte, in Turkey with Erdogan, in Egypt with al-Sisi. You see the rise of far-right parties in France and in Germany and Austria, in Brazil. This is a global phenomenon, and it represents, I think, one of the most serious challenges to the very idea of democracy since the Second World War. All of us in this room who've grown up in that post-World War II generation, I think have felt that because what we've been witnessing every year, year after year, was an increase in democracy and an increase in people's freedoms, the freedom to associate with whom we were, the freedom to practice our faith, the freedom of the press, the freedom to love who we might love, that we were on this inexorable trend, that liberal democracy and representative government was in fact an immutable trend. To paraphrase Martin Luther King, that the moral arc of the universe may be going, but it bends towards justice, and one of the ways it was bending towards justice is it was bending towards democracy. This, I think, has been essentially the article of faith, because it's been borne out by experience since World War II, but now we've come to this point where we can no longer say with confidence that that will be true next year. And with even less confidence that that will be true for the next generation. We are at an inflection point. And I think we are reminded that this assumption that somehow the spread of democracy and human rights is self-effectuating is a flawed assumption. That every generation needs to be the champion of that, or else the idea withers and dies. And so we are in the midst, I think, of a profound ideological struggle, not between communism and capitalism, but between democracy and authoritarianism. Now, it is certainly true that Russia is in the vanguard of pushing the autocratic model, but we can't ignore